All right, so welcome to Abundant EM. We are glad you are here. Turn to a neighbor, say hello, and good afternoon, and how are you? And I'm going to buy you coffee after church, okay? So turn, say hi, do all the things. All right, do all the things. Say hello, say hello. Okay. It's like an introvert's worst nightmare, right? Which is the majority of our church. For someone in church to say, turn to your neighbor. All right, so if you can all stand, we're going to read the word of the Lord together today. We are out of Exodus 32 and 34. It is God's jealous love. It is 5 slides, so we'll read together first, then me, then together, then me, then together. Okay? All right, ready? Begin. The Lord told Moses, "Quick, go down the mountain. How quickly they have turned away from the way I commanded them to live. They have melted down gold and made a calf, and they have bowed down and sacrificed to it. They are saying, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" When they came near the camp, Moses saw the calf and the dancing, and he burned with anger. He threw the stone tablets to the ground, smashing them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf they had made and burned it. Okay, next one. Ready? Begin. Then the Lord told Moses, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones. I will write on them the same words that were on the tablets you smashed. Be ready in the morning to climb up Mount Sinai and present yourself to me on the top of the mountain." The Lord passed in front of Moses, calling out, "Yahweh, the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin, but I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children in the 3rd and 4th generations." Last slide. Ready? Begin. Be very careful never to make a treaty with the people who live in the land where you are going. If you do, you will follow their evil ways and be trapped. You must worship no other gods, for the Lord, whose very name is jealous, is a God who is jealous about his relationship with you. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Okay, who has been to a wedding or been to a part of a wedding, or you were a part of a wedding, or any of those things? Okay? Might have been a while, okay? If you picture the perfect wedding, what comes to mind? What comes to mind? Like a really beautiful, really great, wonderful wedding. Most of the time, hopefully, everyone there is pretty happy, okay? There's joy, there's laughter, there's got to be a happy couple for it to be a wedding, right? Maybe there's flowers, maybe like it's really pretty, everyone looks dressed up, maybe tears of joy. But a wedding usually evokes like joyous occasion for most people, right? Okay, who here pictures the perfect wedding and you imagine that the bride or the groom is running off with another lover in the middle of this ceremony? That would not be a picture perfect wedding. That is like 80% of like movies, but that is not what you think about when you think about a perfect wedding, right? If you were getting married and the person you're getting married to runs off with someone else in the middle of the wedding, it is not a happy day for you, right? So as ridiculous as that sounds, we are going to basically see this exact scenario play out today with the Israelites and God. So we are in our volume of Law and Life, and last week we started God's good character. That God's good laws, the 10 Commandments, we learned are ways to love God and love others. Because when we live the way he calls us to, it brings us freedom, it brings us life. So this week, we see the Israelites' response to the 10 Commandments. Okay? So here's the context. We're painting the picture, all right? Here's Mount Sinai, big mountain, big mountain. Moses is at the top of the mountain. Okay, you don't climb up a mountain in like 2 minutes, right? Like it takes you a while to get up that mountain, all right? So Moses has been up there for a while, and he's talking to God, and he's having this like big, deep moment with God, receiving God's laws, like being super encouraged. But meanwhile, all the Israelites are down at the bottom of the mountain, and they're starting to grow restless and impatient because they've been waiting for a long time for Moses to come back down. So while Moses is getting these laws, so literally it's like a middle of a quote unquote wedding ceremony, right? Like God is like, I'm going to be your God. You will be my people. These are the terms of our marriage vows. That's kind of the idea, right? It's like if you wrote your vows to your husband or wife or whatever, and you're reading them out loud and you're like super touched by it. And they're like, oh, I got to go. My other boyfriend is here. That's what literally is happening right now in this moment. That's like the equivalent that we can understand. And so here's this moment. Moses is like super deep with God, getting all the commandments, and Israel is already breaking the first two commandments already. So here we are in Exodus 32, verse 7 and 8. And the Lord knows what's going on already, right? He's literally giving Moses these commandments, and he knows what they're doing. And he says, Moses, quick, go down. How quickly they have turned away from the way I commanded them to live. Because when Moses went up, before he went up, they had this big thing of like, I will be your God. You'll be my people. Do you agree? And they said, yes. It was kind of like saying, I do, right? We said our I do's. We're going to do this. And Moses goes to get the vows, like written basically, and Israel is already wandered away. How quickly they have turned away. They grow impatient. And what they say was, remember what their trigger was for the the Israelites? Their trigger was that God would abandon them. So now, not only has God abandoned them, but Moses, their leader, has not come back down. He's been gone for a while. So they think Moses and God have also abandoned me. And so what do? Their response is to make a god of their own. They literally take the gold earrings on their ears, their jewelry, they melt it down and they make and mold a calf, like a baby cow basically, right? And they're bowing down and saying, this is the God who brought you out of Egypt, Israel. They're already breaking the first two commandments so easily and so quickly. Just like if they were getting married and in the middle of saying your vows, one person runs off with somebody else. That's what Israel's doing right now. And so in verse 19, Moses going down, and they came near, and Moses saw what they were doing, and he burned with anger, which I would do the same. I would be like, yo, I have literally been up here on this mountain. We told God that he would be our God and we would be his people. We said, I do. We said, yes. We signed a marriage contract, essentially, quote unquote, the like analogy. And you're over here just minutes later. Like, it's not minutes, but basically like right away, you've already wandered off. You're already believing that this golden statue that you made with the gold from your own ears and that you formed with your own hands, that is God. When you saw how he released all the plagues upon Egypt, and you saw the Red Sea, and you saw bread from heaven. That's why when people say, I will believe God when I see him, isn't actually true. Because the Israelites saw God and all of his miracles and all the things he did, and yet they still had trouble believing. Because believing is not about your eyeballs. If it was about your eyeballs, it'd be very easy to believe, right? Believing is about your heart. And am I willing to put my faith and trust that this God I'm following is the one true God? Just like when you get married, you have no idea what the future will hold. But you're trusting that I know this person, I love this person, we've committed enough to the point where I know I can spend the rest of my life with this person. That's exactly what's going on here. God is saying, I will be your God, you'll be my people. This is for life. But here they are. He's burning with anger. He threw the stone tablets to the ground. Those 2 stone tablets were written by God himself. Okay, those 2 commandments symbolized that relationship. It's kind of like a wedding ring symbolizes like a marriage, right? Like that kind of concept. It's a similar analogy. Those 2 stone tablets symbolized all that relationship was. And what did Moses do? He smashed it on the ground. In other words, he's saying, what you did is grounds for breaking this relationship. He's saying you are like here, and it just says that they were bowing down and dancing, but essentially they were doing like lots of pagan things around that statue, things that they saw happening in Egypt and other nations around them, things that God did not want them to be doing. And so he's saying, look, what you just are doing right now, this is grounds for divorce, essentially, if we're using the same analogy. This is grounds to break relationship. Do you understand? He's saying, Israel, wake up. Wake up. What you just did right now is literally breaking the relationship that we have with God. So the question actually is for us. Now, the easier thing for them, it seems easy to us because they lived in a culture where those were their idols at that time. So that was hard for them too. We don't have golden calves in our homes, in our neighborhoods, right? Like it's harder. Like we don't have an obvious idol like that in our lives, in our time, in our society. Idolatry looks very different for us. It's harder to pinpoint. But idolatry is anything that we put as more valuable and more important than God. Whatever takes our time, our energy, in ways that we prioritize above God. Think about it like this, okay? What you value is what you'll spend your money on, right? Okay? So, for example, we got a new car, right? And so you know those new license plates that everyone has, the ones that are black and then white letters, like everyone has that right now, okay? And it does look really nice and minimalistic. So we got our new car and I was like, hey, let's get that license plate. That one looks really pretty and really cool. So, you know, we're Korean though, right? So I'm thinking like everyone has this license plate. It's gotta be like free. It's just like one option, okay? So Moksanim goes there and he's like, can I have the black one? And the lady was like, that's $25 extra. He was like, one-time fee? And she was like, no, every year. And he was like, oh, heck no, we are not paying $25 a year every year to get a prettier looking license plate, okay? Because we're Korean and we don't spend money on that kind of stuff. However, we will, see, there's Nick. It's like $2 a month. You're like, correct, okay? But then here we are, we're Korean, okay? And they're like, you go to the store, or you're eating, and then you're like, wow, this meal costs like $60 per person. But that's worth it. And that costs way more than that one time. Does this make sense? So you put your money where your value is, basically, right? I don't value that black license plate enough to justify $25 extra a year, okay? But there are people who do value that, you know? And then you'll make fun of me because I'm spending money on things that don't make sense to you, right? So the point being, we spend money on the things that we value or we value as important or aligns with our like principles somehow, you know? Or it's like, for example, I'll go to Target and I actually need something for me, okay? I don't know, like a shirt. And I don't have a shirt. And I'm like, you know what? This shirt costs $30. That is way too expensive for a Target shirt. But then I'll go to the shoe section and be like, oh my gosh, look at these cute little shoes. And I'll buy like 16 shoes for Jiyoung. I don't do that. But then it's like $25 per shoe. And I'm like, see, where's my value at? Clearly, her shoes are more important than my shirt at some point. The point being, what you value, you will put your time and your money into, right? In the same way, how we value God, you will know because of the time and energy and effort we put into it. Now, this is not a quantity race, okay? This is not like, oh, that means I got to spend like X amount of time with God. That's not actually correct because that's legalistic too. That's not going to help us grow in God. But it's the quality of time. It's the energy and effort we're putting into putting him first. Does that make sense? It's like, oh, me spending 20 minutes this day reading the word, but you can spend 20 minutes easily doom scrolling, right? Does that make sense? It's the same amount of time. It's the same amount of like time in your day, but what we do with it reflects our priorities. Does that make sense? And so in that sense, that is one way that we can understand idolatry in our time. It feels really like, ooh, I idolize like social media. Ooh, like I idolize $25? Ooh, like I idolize, like, whatever the idolizing is, it doesn't seem or feel very good. But the reality is, if there is something about that, we should be curious. Oh, do I actually idolize money? Do I actually think it'll bring me security and safety? And that's why I chase after it. Do I think that relationships will give me security and safety? So I chase after that. Whatever, does it make sense? Like my career, it can be any of those things. And those things are not bad things. God calls us to work. God calls us to relationship. God calls us to use our money and steward it well. God gives it to us for a reason. Those are not bad things. But it's a matter of priority. It's a matter of priority. And you better believe that every day is a wrestle to put that priority in the right order. Every day. And some days we won't do as well. But the point is, every day I have to ask myself, am I living according to the way that God has called me to? Because the 10 Commandments go in order of love God first and then love others out of that overflow of that love. And if that order is not correct, your life is going to be imbalanced. And it's going to show up somewhere in your life in ways that God did not intend. When God calls us and brings us into his boundaries, it's for our good. So, if you were at your own wedding and your partner, in the middle of saying your vows, runs off with somebody else, how would you respond? How would you feel? How would you react? Okay? The very person that you promised to be with is running off with somebody else. If I were God, I would be very angry. And we see in earlier verses, he was very angry. And yet we see here in Exodus 34, verse 1, it says this, then the Lord told Moses, remember the first tablets were smashed on the ground to represent, hey, the relationship is broken. What you've done has violated the covenant. The Lord told Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones. I will write on them the same words that were on the tablets you smashed. Be ready in the morning to climb back up and present yourself to me. He's saying, we're doing this again. In other words, we're doing this again. You all broke it. It deserves to have been broken because you broke the relationship. And yet I'm here already telling you to make 2 new stone tablets to come back up, and we're going to do this again. What comes next in Exodus 34, if you can get that video ready, what comes next in Exodus 34 is one of the most important descriptions of God's character in the entire Bible, okay? This is the first time we have a really comprehensive understanding of what God is saying about himself. If anybody knows God the best, who is it going to be? It's going to be God, okay? So this passage here is what comes next. And these folks and BibleProject do it way better than I do. So we're going to take a moment to watch how they understand and describe through Scripture, explaining the Hebrew, all the fun stuff, to really dive deep into who God is in his character. Can we get the lights in the back?
The Bible is a collection of many ancient Israelite scrolls, and together they're telling one unified story.
Now, if you look at the second scroll, Exodus, you'll find 2 important sentences. They're actually so important that they're referenced and re-quoted over 20 more times within the Bible itself.
It must be important. What does it say?
Yahweh, Yahweh, that's God's name, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness.
I can see why it's repeated so often. These attributes of God are really lovely.
And the statement goes on. He maintains loyal love for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he won't declare innocent the guilty. He will bring the iniquities of the fathers upon the children and grandchildren to the 3rd and the 4th.
Okay, hold on. This last part takes a bit of a turn. We're first talking about God's love, and suddenly it's about his judgment on grandkids. So is God merciful or vengeful?
Yeah, great question. Let's see these words in a larger context by looking at something important in Genesis, the first scroll of the Bible. There, God chooses one family, the Israelites, from among the nations, and he promises that he's going to rescue the whole world through this family somehow.
And Genesis ends with the family of Abraham in Egypt.
Then the book of Exodus begins, and this book has two large movements.
Right, okay, so this first movement of Exodus, God rescues Israel from slavery in Egypt.
And in the second movement, God leads them to Mount Sinai, where they camp out for a year. And God invites this whole nation into a partnership called a covenant, so that they can be shaped by his values and character.
And represent God to all the other nations.
Exactly. Now, this whole Mount Sinai movement in Exodus can be broken up into 4 literary units. First, there's the actual ceremony where the Israelites agree to be God's partners. And God sets up the terms of the relationship, starting with the 10 commandments. The first 2 are:
don't give your allegiance to other gods, and don't make any idol images of God. Seems simple enough.
After that, God shows Moses detailed blueprints for building this sacred home so that God can come and live among them.
Oh, right, and then comes a really long narrative about the building of that sacred home.
But you missed something. Right in between these sections is the story that has our description about God's character. The story begins with Moses going up on the mountain, writing down the partner agreement, as the Israelites are at the base of the mountain, violating the first 2 commands.
That's ridiculous. They're breaking the covenant vows while the ceremony is still going on.
Yes. And so God is hurt and angry, and he warns Moses that this betrayal will keep on happening. God is ready to call it quits.
But what about his promise to rescue the world through them?
Yeah, exactly. This is what Moses brings up. And so, what is God going to do? Should he end the partnership, which would be fair?
Or will he be faithful to his promise to Abraham and show them mercy?
Yeah, exactly. Now, look back at the words that we began with, and you'll see they're about this very tension between God's mercy and his justice.
Okay, so the statement opens like this: a God compassionate and gracious.
In Hebrew, this line has 3 words that rhyme: El Rahum V'Chanun. And the line overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness matches the first, as it also has 3 Hebrew words: Rav Chesed V'Emet.
Each of those lines have 2 attributes of God, and they surround a 5th attribute, that God is slow to anger.
Right. Now, that's the first half of this description of God. Then comes the second half. God maintains loyal love for thousands. And how is he going to remain loyal to people who keep rebelling against him? By forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin.
But God's forgiveness doesn't mean people can just do whatever they want.
Right. God's mercy is balanced in what follows. Yet he won't declare innocent the guilty. He'll bring the iniquities of the fathers upon the children and grandchildren to the 3rd and the 4th.
The 3rd and the 4th what?
Well, it's referring to generations of people who repeat their ancestors' rebellion against God. They'll get what they deserve. But notice, this small number of generations contrasts that massive number up above.
God's loyal love to thousands.
Right. And then check this out. God's forgiveness of iniquity in this line is contrasted with his justice on iniquity in this line.
Okay, and all those lines are surrounding a central line here about God's justice. He will not declare innocent the guilty. So while God is slow to anger, he is also just.
Right. This is the tension that these 2 sentences are exploring. How does a faithful and loyal God deal with such a rebellious people? This is the challenge God faces in this story, and it's the same challenge he faces in the whole biblical story as he works to rescue the world through this family.
With that in mind, we can take a closer look at these 5 attributes that God declares about himself to Moses. A God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness.
And we'll see how each one leads us deeper into the character of God and into the story of the Bible.
Okay, so here is the verse. Verse 6. The Lord passed in front of Moses, calling out Yahweh, which is his name, the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin, but I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children of the 3rd and 4th generations. Well, they explained it better than I did, But the point being this: God is merciful and he is just. He cannot stop one in order to do the other. He's always exercising both. He's saying, I will be merciful. I'll be slow to be angry, compassionate, gracious, and I cannot excuse when wrong things happen. Because if I did, I would not be God. And so always there is that tension going on. And so when God does anything in our lives, we have to understand that if we're experiencing a season of judgment, it's because there was a long season of slow to anger before that. If we're in a long season of slow to anger, you feel like, ooh, God didn't catch me with that or something, then we have to believe that he is merciful and he is just, and he does it perfectly. And the only response when we deeply realize the character of God is to do what Moses did here in verse 8. Moses immediately threw himself to the ground and worshiped. Because can you imagine what Moses is feeling? Okay, he is their representative. All right, God could have been like, you know what? As the spokesperson for Israel, they broke the covenant. Death. He could have just done. Y'all are obliterated. He could have done that. Can you imagine Moses like a little bit scared? Like, what is going to happen? This is like the ultimate of the getting called to the principal's office. Like, this is like the worst feeling in the world. And he goes there. And he's like, what is God going to say? And God steps out, not talking about them at all, but actually talking about who he is. Yahweh, I am who I am. And I am compassionate, merciful, slow to anger, abounding in love. And so now he's telling them, because you understand, when I am being merciful, it's not because I am being just. I am always just, and I am merciful. And so the Israelites are now headed, they're in Mount Sinai, but their end destination is back to Canaan, back to the promised land, back to where Abraham's family came from. Because that was the land. Remember, Genesis 12, God called Abraham away from where he was to the land of Canaan. That was the land that was tied to the promise. And so he's telling them, when you go there, when you get there, when you reach the end destination, next verse, it says here in verse 12, be very careful not to make a treaty. Do not be like the people that are already there, because if you do, you will fall into their same trap, into the same idolatry as they are. You must worship no other gods, because God is jealous for relationship with you. What did God promise Abraham in Genesis 12? Many descendants, bless the world, and what? Land. Those were the three things he tied. That land itself is nothing special, except that that is the land where God's promise comes to pass. So God's promise is tied to those three things. That is why the promised land, Canaan, is so important. But in the 400 plus years since Jacob's family's been gone, you better believe that was prime real estate, okay? Over those 400 plus years, other groups have come in and have taken hold in that place. No longer is it Jacob's land that's living there. It's a bunch of other people. And they're all not believers. They are not people of God. They worship idols, and they do a lot of things that God does not want people to do. And so that's why he tells them, when you go back, because you will, because I promised it. Not because you guys are smart enough to do it, because you guys just keep making mistakes. But he's saying, look, I will bring you back. I said I would. And when you go back, do not fall into their idolatry, because that will be your temptation. And when you do, it will break relationship. And that breaks my heart, because I am a jealous God. For us, when we think of the word jealous, it's often a negative connotation. Because as humans, we get jealous for selfish reasons most of the time, right? Or like out of our own hurt, we are jealous. But that is not how God works. His jealousy is just. He is the one true God. That is the fact. And so as the creator of all, as the one who deserves all worship, as the one who wants relationship with us, he's saying, if you whore after other gods, you cannot have right relationship with me. And that is why I tell you not to take other idols, because those idols will suck you dry and leave you empty-handed. And that is not what I want for my people. I want you to know me and love me because I can give you all that you need. So our main point today is this. God is compassionate and gracious, and he is also a jealous God in the very best sense of the word because he is a just God who is good and deserves worship. So how do we respond? Can I have the phrasing come up? How do we respond? I made it easy for us because I realized all the words that we do in response to this are all starting with the letter R, okay? So it's cheesy, but it's easy to remember. It's 3 R's. How do we respond to knowing God is this way? He is deeply compassionate and merciful and just and jealous. The 3 R's are this. The first one is to recognize our idols because we all have them. We all have them. We all have them. And some we struggle with more than others. And so we have to recognize the idols. The greatest thing that the enemy will do is to cause us to deny our idols or like help us not be aware of them. Because if you can't be aware of it, you can't fix it, right? There's no problem. So the first is to recognize the idols. And the second is to repent and ask the Lord to forgive. Because look, Israel here, if they could do that and he forgives them, how much more us, right? There is no idol you can go after that God is like, oh no, see that I don't forgive that one. God doesn't do that. When we come to him and say, look, God, this idol I've been chasing, I need you to forgive me. I'm sorry. That's not the right thing. And after we recognize, after we repent, we return to God. We go back. That's the only way. In the book of Hosea, he's a prophet in the Old Testament. And during Israel's time, you'll see, we'll go through the whole Bible, we'll see. Israel has this pattern over and over again. They'll be good with God, they'll fall away. Good with God, fall away. And Hosea was a prophet that was sent by God to be the mouthpiece of God, literally to share God's word and say, come back to God, because they had wandered again. And so Hosea was the unfortunate prophet that he had to literally experience what God was experiencing. So God told him, Hosea, I want you to understand how it feels for me to see my people literally chasing other gods. And so I want you to go and marry a prostitute. And you're going to marry her. You're going to have kids with her. And she's going to keep going back into prostitution. And she's going to keep going back to other lovers. And as that happens, I want Israel to see. Can you imagine? It's like the pastor. That's what that was like in that time. It was insane. And God was like, I want you to see 2 things. I want you to see my heart, but I also want you to see the heart of that woman. That no matter what she does, I will always take her back. I will always forgive. I'm always chasing after her. Literally, Hosea had to go back and bring her out of prostitution multiple times. After giving birth to his children, would still keep doing that. And that was symbolic to show what Israel was doing over and over and over again. Why does he do that? Why does God put up with that? Because of his love. That's the only explanation. And that's the only reason that someone would chase after someone who is breaking their heart over and over again, is because of that love. So can we all stand right now? That when we hear God say he is compassionate and merciful and just and jealous, that it is because of love that he extends that to us. So right now, where are you with those 3 R's? Have you recognized the idols that tempt you often in your life? Let's repent of those right now. And let's commit to return to him again, because he's always looking for us to return. Let's pray together.